just landed yesterday, so. 2003, Glenn must have only been like 15 or so. Such a young-looking guy. Good morning, everybody. It's good to be back in the land of Oz. We had a great trip to the USA, except the actual travel. That wasn't great at all. It's never great because it's 20 hours on a confined, cramped seat. But it could be worse. 60 years ago, we would have had to take a boat, and that would have taken a month or two, I don't know. So it's been about 4 years since we've been back to see my family in the U.S., and so it was long overdue. My mom, for those who know her, she sends her love. While we were there, we got to not just spend time with her, but we also got to go to a wedding. So that was kind of one of the highlights towards the end. It was my youngest niece. She got married. Weddings they're always fun, right? You eat too much, and everyone sort of lets their hair down. So really enjoyed it, except for the DJ. The DJ, he was too loud. And I know, like some of you are thinking already, it's the DJ is not the problem. I'm the problem. I'm too old. And firstly, that's very unkind. And secondly, you're going to get old too, so. And thirdly, I got a fact for you. So my brother at the wedding, he has an iWatch. This must be a new feature. So the DJ started out, and it was okay. I don't know what they do. There's a certain point where they just grab that knob, and they're like 11. He cranked it up, right? And then all of a sudden, you can't really speak to anybody. And my brother's watch goes off, and there's a message on it. No word of a lie. It said, the audio levels in the room are at 90 decibels. In 30 minutes, you will have damaged your hearing. So it wasn't just because I'm old. The watch told us it was too loud. We'd originally planned this trip a couple years ago. It was in, I don't know, maybe April of 2020. And, of course, you know what happened in 2020. The world changed for everybody. Now, my kids, they were pretty disappointed. They were really looking forward. I mean, the whole family was, but the kids were. And so during the intervening years, right, they've always been asking, when are we going back to the States? Like, when are we going to go visit family? So when we told them earlier this year that we had planned the trip, they got really excited. Hugo, my youngest, he was especially thrilled about this because he wanted to see the snow, right? And now it was 3 years ago, it was 4 years ago he was last there, and he was 3 years old at the time. And when we visited, it was towards the end of the year, and almost immediately when we landed, there was a heavy snowfall. So that part of the country doesn't always get heavy snowfall that time of year, but it did. And so we just went outside and had a blast, right? So we did all the things that I'd gotten to do when I was a bit younger, growing up with snow. And we built a snowman in the front yard. It was taller than my boys. We did, had a snowball fight, and we did, the angels, the snow angels. So it took me back to kind of fun times. So I had to tell Hugo, sorry, you're not going to see the snow. It's going to be hot, and it's going to be humid in New Jersey. And he said, but why? And I said, global warming. It's a bit hard to explain northern and southern hemisphere. So that was the first time we've been back in the middle of summer. Like I said, normally we're going towards the end of the year, and it's cooler there. So we... So in the middle of our wet winter, we're packing for, the beach. Shorts and bathers and goggles and, flip-flops, thongs. And so it felt a little bit strange, right, to kind of reverse our season. And another thing that was strange when we got there was the days are long, right, in summer, especially at that particular latitude. And so it would be at 5:30, the light would be coming in the morning. And we're used to sort of these short days here. And then by 8:30 at night only was the light gone. So it's strange, but seasons, they kind of influence our behaviors and activities. In winter, I think we're less active. We're more housebound, right? We don't go out as much. But in summer, it's all outdoors, especially in Australia. Our physical activity increases. We put on shorts and do long walks and runs, try and get fit. I think the seasons can even influence our mood. At least for me, I know that kind of in summer, I'm more willing to do things, to go out. I feel like I have more energy. But in winter, it's a little bit more shut down. Now, there's a thing that's called SAD, seasonal affective disorder. It's true, you can Google that. It's not a joke, didn't make it up. It's a type of depression, right, which is related to changes in seasons. Some people in Norway, they have like a night that never ends from November to January. Imagine how sad they are. You have to understand the season that you're in, right? You got to be ready for it. Understand how it affects your mood. You need to make allowances and you need to make adjustments. You can't make a snowman on a hot summer day. You don't put on your puffy jacket and beanie and the winter gloves. You'll get heat stroke. Doesn't make sense. When it's the middle of winter, we don't organize a trip to the beach and go swimming, except if you're like a committed surfer or the Cronulla polar bears, but they're a bit strange. Season influences what we can and what we can't do. We learn to live in the season, and we live through the season, but we don't control the season. We only control what we do within it, how we act. That's an ancient wisdom. Tradition says this was written by Solomon 11,000 years ago in Ecclesiastes. For everything there is a season and a time for every matter under heaven, a time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to pluck up what is planted, a time to kill and a time to heal, a time to break down and a time to build up, a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to mourn and a time to dance, a time to cast away stones and a time to gather stones together, a time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing. That last one, I think COVID has turned this into a time to refrain from embracing. It's just a fist bump. What season are you in today? Winter? Heading into spring? Is it time for you to dance? Weddings are a good time to dance. Got a wedding coming up soon? Maybe be some dancing. It's certainly a good time to dance this century. Last century, if you're in a church, it was a little bit of a no-no. Back to that wedding that we went to, my niece's wedding. My other niece, she has an 8-year-old boy. And his grandfather, my brother-in-law, he warned me before the wedding, watch him, he loves to dance, and he's really good. I'm like, all right, he's 8 years old, come on, how good can he be? So when we go to the wedding, we see him for the first time. He's dressed like he's got game, all right? You kind of immediately are arrested by how he's set up. So picture this. He's got white leather penny loafers, moccasins. He's got no socks on. He's got a tight-fitted suit, a gray, reflective but shiny, and he's kind of high waters, And underneath, he's wearing a white shirt with the 70s style collar, pulled out wide, and it's kind of open down the center. And around his neck, he's got a gold chain. You got that picture, right? So when he's getting his picture taken, I mean, he's just got swagger, all right? There's no other way to describe it. He's just kind of posing, and for all the world, he looks like a white miniature Bruno Mars. So he's ready. And as soon as the music starts, on the dance floor, he's out. Like he's absolutely one of the first people out there. And guess what? He dances just like Bruno Mars. Like he's really good. He seemed to have just an endless range of moves and energy. He danced all night. He never got off. I saw him the next day, and he's walking kind of gingerly around, barefoot. And on top of his big toes are two massive blisters, right? Because his shoes were too tight, but he didn't care. He pushed through the pain because it was time to dance. What season are you in today? Is it time to dance? Is it time to weep? We held a funeral yesterday in this very building. A loved member of our community lost her son. He was my age. As a young man, he grew up in this church. There were no warning signs. His death was completely unexpected. He was just gone. Such a shock. His children lost a dad. His wife lost a partner. His siblings lost a brother. So it was a time to weep. This room was just wall to wall, full of people. There were so many that some were standing at the back. And for those close to him, the ones that loved him the most, it was a time to mourn. Weeping is a cold and a rainy day, but mourning, that's an entire winter. The nights are long, the days are cold, you don't want to leave the house. What season are you in today? We've been talking about the book of Acts in this series. I got a picture for you, if the media team can pop it up. Does that look familiar? Does anyone remember last century when everyone had Bibles, like physical Bibles, leather bound? And then the peak of the leather-bound Bible, I think, was when they put at the back of it color images, maps, geography of the ancient world, right? I kind of miss that, that I literally got out my Bible yesterday and just kind of thumbed through that back section. We don't get this anymore, this kind of old school reference. So this picture, I'm not sure if you can see it clearly enough, at least I can. It really maps out Paul's second missionary journey. I think this is kind of just going to be interesting to look at this quickly today and help us follow, because I want to look at a couple points, locations where Paul went. So the book of Acts records 3 missionary journeys of Paul, if you remember. They were all initiated from Antioch. So Antioch is on the right of that page. It's above Jerusalem. It's in the yellow section, Syria, right? So that was Paul's home church, and all his missionary journeys really started from there. And he explored, went on mission trips around the Mediterranean. So the first trip he had was with Barnabas. And he went through Cyprus, which is an island, towards the center of the Mediterranean. And then they went up to southern Asia Minor. And that one took 6 to 9 months. But the second journey, which is the one I want to talk about today, took about 3 years. Because he stayed in Corinth for a year and a half. But as you can see, the distances are enormous, right? And obviously, it's either by foot or it's by boat. And so just the time to travel would have been tremendous. It takes a lot of commitment, right, to do that. That's not getting on a plane for 20 hours. That's day by day, foot by foot. So the journey began on this second trip. It began in conflict even before they packed their bags. It's not a good way to start, right? Imagine that first day of your holidays and you're in an argument. So at Antioch, Barnabas and Paul disagreed sharply over taking John Mark with them. The first trip that they went with, they were accompanied by John Mark. And about halfway through the trip, he left. He went back home. And for Paul, that's not good. It meant he just didn't want to be involved with John Mark anymore. He didn't want him on the trip. He thought he was unreliable. And so Barnabas and Paul, they argue about this, and they can't settle on the matter. And so Barnabas, he does take Mark, Paul, and he goes on his own trip. And Paul takes Silas, and that's the one we have recorded in the book of Acts, as they go on separate journeys. So it began with a time to refrain from embracing. Paul and Silas, they first traveled to Lystra. You can see it as towards the top there, through Tarsus, which was his hometown, and into the green of Galatia, Lystra. And in the first trip he took, in Lystra he was stoned. He was persecuted, and they stoned him. But this time, instead of persecution, he meets a disciple whose name is Timothy. And Timothy immediately decides to join Paul and Silas on their journey. And what's wonderful about this is the lifelong relationship that Paul and Timothy form from this. Paul becomes Timothy's mentor. In several of his letters, you can see that he calls Timothy his son, or in other cases, his brother. And there are 2 letters in the Bible written to Timothy. So the journey may have started out with a time where relationship was broken, but at Lystra, it was time for a new relationship. It was time to embrace. So the 3 leave Lystra with the intention of preaching the gospel in the rest of Asia Minor. And so that's essentially Turkey, modern-day Turkey, right? All that upper section there. And in the red is what is, they called Asia Minor. And so as they travel through, this is the first time they've been here. The first journey didn't look here. They want to preach the gospel, but the book of Acts tells us the Spirit prevents them, tells them not to do that. And Mark mentioned this in one of his previous messages. So they move on, right? So they're traveling a long distance, but they can't do what they've come to do. And then they decide, well, maybe we go up to Bithynia, which is towards the top. Yeah, maybe we can preach there. But again, the Spirit says, don't go to Bithynia. Why does the Spirit say no? I mean, the point of their mission is to spread the good news of the gospel. He says no because it's not the right time. They will come back to this area on their 3rd journey, but now is the time to be quiet. And when God says it's time to be quiet, there's no point in speaking. When all paths appear to be blocked, the Spirit then speaks to Paul in a vision, and he sees a Macedonian asking them to come and help. So they get on a boat, and they sail to Macedonia to begin their next work. They'd never visited here before. So in Macedonia, they preach the gospel, and people are saved. Then they encounter opposition and then physical persecution, and they're forced to leave. Now, that happens in city after city. It's about 3 cities they go through, and it's the same pattern. Turn up, preach, people get saved, they get kicked out, and again and again. And so they essentially get kicked out all the way across Macedonia until they hit Athens. In Philippi, they were beaten and imprisoned. In Thessalonica, the crowds rioted. And in Berea, those same Thessalonians, they pursued them. And they kicked them out of there too. So this is the time to gather It's the time to plant, and it's the time to flee. It's the time to leave. Time after time again. So finally, Paul finds his way to Athens. A little bit of history about Athens. It's an ancient city, and it's the symbolic center, really the heart of the Greek and what's called the Hellenistic culture of that period. So Greece isn't a superpower anymore, right? Rome is the big gorilla in the room. And Greece hasn't been a superpower for a long time, but it's the cultural and intellectual influence which makes it so important. It's got immense historical background, and its influence is really pervasive through Asia Minor. It really started when Alexander the Great, probably 300 years ago, kind of swept through and conquered Persia and Egypt and the surrounding lands. So Athens is important to the Greeks, and it's important to how that part of the world thinks. Paul finds himself alone in Athens, and he's waiting for Timothy and Silas, who are delayed in Berea. So he does what he does, which is to go into the synagogues, and he shares the gospel. And then he goes into the marketplace, and he shares the gospel, and he debates with people. And in the marketplace, he gets into a debate with a group of Epicurean and Stoic philosophers. This is quite different to the pattern that we've seen before. Paul always goes and he talks to Jews, or he talks to Gentiles, who are God-believing Jews. But now he's talking to people that have no background, no knowledge of, the God of the Bible as we understand it. So as he's talking to him, they're attracted to some of the ideas here, and so they invite him to share his ideas with this council called, I'm going to mispronounce it, Areopagus. Yeah, I got it wrong. Areopagus. I tried this about 6 times before. It was probably the 7th time that would have stuck it in my head. So the council, it's like a court or an official assembly where the leading thinkers form in Athens. And Paul, he stands up before the assembly, and he's got an opportunity to share the gospel. And for the writer Luke, this is really a critical point in the story of Acts. There's a few other ones, but this is really essential. And we find it in Acts 17, verse 24. I'm not going to read the whole speech or his talk, but I'm going to read part of it, which is the part that I'm interested. So in 24, the God who made the world and everything in it is the Lord of heaven and earth, and he does not live in temples built by human hands. He's not served by human hands as if he needed anything. Rather, he himself gives everyone life and breath and everything else. From one man he made all the nations, that they should inhabit the whole earth, and he marked out their appointed times in history and the boundaries of their lands. God did this so that they would seek him and perhaps reach out for him and find him, though he is not far from any one of us. For in him we live and move and have our being. So many interesting things that happen here, but I want to focus on that last thought. For in him we live and move and have our being. Does that sound like something you could say today? In him I live and move and have my being. It's easier to say that on a Sunday, dressed up in my suit, my jacket. But what about yesterday? What about last week? Did I live and move and have my being in God last week? Could I stand up today and say to you that with integrity, I live and move and have my being in him. The integrity where my life reflects the truth of that statement. Can we as a church stand up today and say, in him we live and move and have our being? Paul went through many seasons in his travels. I mean, there are many other stories in the book of Acts. Try to just give you a flavor of that second journey. There was a time for him to refrain from embracing. There was a time for him to embrace. There was a time for him to be silent. There was a time for him to speak. There was a time to plant and a time to leave. There was a time to stand up. There were good times where he wanted to dance, and there were hard times where he took a literal beating. In all those times, no matter what the circumstances, I believe Paul could say, in him I live and move and have my being. In him I live and move and have my being. And if you and I can say that like he said that, then we can endure any season that we find ourselves in. We can find peace in any season. Storms come, the wind blows, the windows rattle. We can find peace. In the hard seasons, we can thrive and we can live. In the good times and the bad, we can move as he directs us. We can find our purpose in him, whether it's winter, spring, summer, or autumn, whether the sun shines or the rain comes down. I'm so thankful and blessed that my family and I were part of this community. I count it a joy to work with you in the kingdom of God. I'm glad to be part of a church which is full of people who have gifts and who are willing to use them in the service of God. That means everyone who's involved in the community, in the things that are seen and the things that are not seen. They're all important for building up the body of believers. If each member of the body is strong in Christ and we have unity through his Spirit, then the church is going to prosper and it's going to grow. Because when our purpose and our effort, it's aligned with God, then all things work together for the good of the church. We can have confidence in that. We've had hard times in the past. I don't know if we were taking a beating, but maybe metaphorically speaking. But God never abandoned us. You know, in the natural, I look back and I had a thought that maybe there was no hope. I certainly felt that. Can't depend in the church on our natural eyes. They can let us down. I felt that, maybe some of you felt that, but not everyone felt that. God was with us. We had this prophetic word several months ago, which was given to the church. I want to remind you of it. Even in the seasons that are hard, I've never left you nor forsaken you. We were never alone, right? Never. In the deepest of winter, God was with us, and he'll be with us in the summer and in the springtime too. You know, when it rained for a month and the gutters overflowed, God was with us. We can trust in this with full confidence. We can trust in him. We can trust in the future that is in him. And we can say, like Paul, in him we live and we move and we have our being. In him we live and move and have our being. Let's close in prayer. Lord, thank you for your word, which inspires us and lifts us. And thank you for your Spirit, which gives us guidance and direction and inspiration. And thank you for your Son, who shed his blood for our sins, that we may be restored into a relationship with you. And thank you for this church, this community of believers who meets together and shares their lives together. Help us to be obedient to your call, to work in your kingdom with persistence and with joy, knowing that we are contributing to your restoration of this creation. In your name, amen. Bless you, church.
Thanks, Andrew. Wonderful message. Great to have you back. All right, guys, stay behind for some fellowship now. We'll have some coffee out the back, and we'll see you all next week at 10:30. Thank you.